What if standing up for what's right cost you everything? What if a simple act of kindness, a routine greeting, a warm cup of coffee, led to betrayal, unemployment, and an uncertain future? Megan never imagined that treating a customer with dignity at Lancaster Grill, the small diner where she worked, would turn her life upside down. Fired without warning, humiliated by her coworkers, and left wondering how she would make ends meet. She faced a moment of despair. But what if that very act of integrity was the reason she would rise higher than she ever dreamed? When an unexpected phone call from a mysterious stranger reveals a shocking truth, Megan is given a second chance, one that comes with power, responsibility, and the opportunity to change not just her fate, but an entire workplace culture. Can she turn a place of prejudice into one of fairness? Can she prove that kindness, even in the face of cruelty, is the ultimate strength? Join us in reflecting on this true story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification for more daily stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you are watching. For we would love to hear from you. Megan had always believed in hard work. Growing up in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, she was taught that showing up on time, treating others with kindness, and putting in an honest day's effort were marks of good character. These simple values had guided her all her life. Even so, she never expected that doing the right thing could cost her so much. On an otherwise ordinary morning, she would discover just how high that price could be. For almost 3 years, she had worked at Lancaster Grill. It wasn't glamorous, a modest diner located near a gas station and a laundromat on the east side of Columbus. Locals stopped by for coffee. The occasional traveler passed through for a quick meal, and families with rowdy kids filled the booths on Sundays. Megan initially took the job just to cover her bills and help her younger brother, Evan, through college. She never expected it to become such a big part of her life. Evan was in his second year, juggling classes in engineering and part-time shifts at the campus library. Their mom did what she could, but finances were stretched thin. Megan quietly sent extra money when possible, covering things like textbooks or groceries, without ever mentioning it to her brother. He would have protested, insisted he handle things on his own. But Megan felt it was her responsibility as an older sister to make sure he never lacked support. She pulled double shifts whenever she could, ignoring the ache in her feet and the fatigue in her bones. The diner's day-to-day life was easy to fall into. Mornings started with coffee brewing in the back, the kitchen staff chopping up potatoes for breakfast skillets, and oldies music humming through the overhead speakers. Over time, Megan memorized the usual crowd: retirees who ordered black coffee, a few truck drivers who liked bacon and eggs, and the high school students too busy checking their phones to notice their toast getting cold. The mundane routine dulled the week's worries, at least until you realized how little you were getting paid, or how the management never really noticed your existence unless you messed up. That was where Tom came in. He was the manager on record, but not much of a leader. He rarely left his cramped office unless he needed to reprimand someone or make sure the tills lined up with the inventory. To him, the numbers mattered more than people. If your drawer was short a few bucks, you'd get an earful. If a customer left unhappy, though, he barely reacted, unless it meant a bad review that threatened revenue. Beth had been at Lancaster Grill longer than Megan, but seniority hadn't made her kinder. Her tableside charm was saved for customers who looked like they might tip well or who came in dressed in press suits. She treated other folks with barely disguised irritation. Jason, a newer server, followed Beth's lead. He had a habit of ignoring tables if he sensed the tips might be low, and he took pride in placing minimal effort into the job. Together, Beth and Jason fostered an air of hostility toward customers who, for whatever reason, didn't seem worth their time. Megan saw it all: the dismissive gestures, the eye rolls, the way Beth and Jason whispered behind the counter instead of greeting people. She wasn't confrontational, but it bothered her. Every time Megan tried to nudge them toward fairness, they brushed her off. There was a particular evening a few months ago when she pointed out that a family had been waiting too long for water. Beth's response was cold. "You don't get paid extra for being a saint, Megan." After that, Megan learned to keep her head down. Still, her instinct to treat everyone decently never really went away. She believed that a job in the service industry meant serving people, regardless of appearance or assumptions. That mindset set her apart, and it was exactly that attitude that would propel her life into a direction she never saw coming. It all began on a slow Wednesday evening, right after the dinner rush when the traffic died down. Megan was behind the counter, refilling sugar dispensers and tidying up. She was tired, but at least things were quiet. That's when the bell above the diner door jingled, and an older black man walked in wearing simple slacks and a button-up. The moment he stepped forward, Megan's entire world shifted, though she didn't realize it yet. The old bell chimed its familiar note. Megan looked up from the sugar packets in time to see the man survey the diner. He wore a calm expression, but there was a hint of guardedness in his eyes. She'd seen that look before in customers who sensed the staff might not be eager to serve them. Sure enough, Beth didn't lift her head from her phone, and Jason, chatting with another server, gave the newcomer a glance, but made no move to greet him. Everything in Megan warned her that if she dared to step forward, she would once again be labeled a saint who cared too much. She could already picture Beth rolling her eyes, might even hear Jason's muttered remarks about how she was wasting time on a table unlikely to tip generously. Yet Megan couldn't shake the thought that this man had come in just like anyone else, expecting at least a basic welcome. As seconds dragged on, no one acknowledged him. The moment felt thick with tension. So Megan did what she always did. She tried to do the right thing. She wiped her hands on her apron and grabbed a menu. "Evening, sir," she said politely, hoping her smile looked genuine. "Just you tonight?" His gaze shifted to her, and the guarded look in his eyes softened slightly. "Yes, ma'am," he replied in a calm tone that carried more warmth than his expression suggested. Megan gestured toward a booth by the window, and he followed. She knew Beth and Jason were watching, probably holding back snickers, but she didn't care. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked once he settled in. The man considered her briefly. "Coffee. Black," he said. She nodded and hurried to fill a cup from the fresh pot. As she walked back, she noticed Beth leaning toward Jason, whispering something that made him snort. Megan felt her face heat up, but pushed aside her irritation. She placed the coffee on the table and gave him a measured smile. "Let me know if you need anything else." He looked up, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Thank you," he said quietly. There was a pause before he added, "You the only one working tonight?" His voice was pitched so that only she could hear, and she understood the unspoken question. Megan stole a quick glance at Beth and Jason, who were definitely not busy. "Feels like it sometimes," she admitted. She handed him the menu, and he scanned it before asking for a recommendation. Without hesitation, Megan pitched the grilled salmon, her personal favorite. He agreed. When she took his order to the kitchen, Beth's voice cut across the diner in a stage whisper. "She's wasting her energy." Jason smirked. Megan forced herself to ignore them. Part of her wanted to bark back that a little kindness never killed anyone, but she had learned that no argument would change them. The rest of the evening passed slowly. The man ate his meal in polite silence. Megan made sure his coffee stayed topped up, dropping by occasionally to ask how he was doing. Each time, he gave her a quiet word of thanks. She noticed Tom, the manager, peek out of his office a couple of times, staring at them with a furrowed brow. She couldn't guess his thoughts, but she had a bad feeling. Whenever Tom actually noticed an interaction on the floor, something unpleasant tended to follow. When the man finished, he paid in cash, left a decent tip, and thanked Megan again for her kindness. She offered a small smile, hoping she'd at least made his evening better than it could have been. As he left, Beth made sure to roll her eyes conspicuously, and Jason let out a sarcastic chuckle. Megan collected the empty plates, trying not to let their attitudes ruin her mood. But a knot of worry settled in her stomach. In the past, calling out that kind of rudeness or going the extra mile for certain customers had earned her nothing but snarky comments. Was Tom upset because she was ignoring the unspoken rules of who they bothered to serve well? She'd never had an official warning, but Beth and Jason's sneers told her that she might be in trouble again. That night, Megan barely slept. She should have felt proud for simply treating a paying customer like a human being. Instead, she couldn't shake the fear that her days at Lancaster Grill were numbered. If Tom decided she was a problem, she'd be out of work, with rent and Evan's expenses to cover. That possibility chilled her to the bone. As dawn approached, Megan convinced herself she was overreacting. She had done her job. Any decent manager would see that. But Tom wasn't exactly known for fairness. She arrived the next morning determined to keep her head high. But the instant she stepped inside, she saw the looks on Beth's and Jason's faces. And her heart sank. Something was definitely wrong. Sunlight trickled in through the diner's front windows, illuminating Beth and Jason, who stood near the counter wearing matching smug expressions. Megan's pulse quickened. They rarely stopped chattering long enough to stare. This couldn't be good. She forced a smile and walked in. But Beth's cold stare made it clear that any pretense of friendliness was out the window. Tom's office door swung open before Megan could utter a greeting. Tom stood there, a stack of papers in his hand, brow furrowed as though he'd been waiting for her. "Megan," he said curtly, "in here." He didn't even glance at Beth or Jason, who exchanged a quick, triumphant smirk. Megan's stomach sank. Stepping into the cramped office, she noticed the desk was cluttered with invoices and an open file. Tom didn't invite her to sit. Instead, he just closed the door, let out a measured breath, and said, "We're letting you go." The words slammed into her like a punch. She stared, mouth slightly open, trying to process what he'd said. "Letting me go," she repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it less real. Her heart hammered. She hadn't been warned, hadn't been written up, nothing. She'd arrived that morning prepared to clock in like any other day. Tom stayed expressionless. "It's not working out." "That makes no sense," Megan said, voice shaking with disbelief. "I've been here nearly 3 years. I'm never late. I don't call out. I do my job." Tom held up his hand to silence her. "Decision's final," he muttered. "You can pick up your last paycheck next week." Megan's eyes burned. She thought of Evan, of rent, of how she had no safety net. Her anger flared. "You're firing me because of last night, aren't you?" she demanded. She suspected Beth and Jason had run to Tom, complaining that she was making them look bad by actually serving everyone with respect. Tom didn't confirm it, but his silence was answer enough. "You know this is wrong," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Tom's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Megan realized she could yell, beg, or argue, but it wouldn't matter. He'd already made his choice. Feeling numb, she pulled off her apron and left it on the chair. "Good luck finding someone else who cares about this place," she added softly as she turned to go. When she emerged, Beth was perched by the counter, a self-satisfied grin on her face. Jason pretended to be busy wiping a table, but the smugness in his expression was unmistakable. Megan felt anger coil in her chest. She wanted to say something biting, to call them out for the cruelty they'd shown that customer. But what good would it do? She refused to give them the satisfaction of a meltdown. Shoulders stiff, she walked out the front door into the crisp morning air for the last time as an employee of Lancaster Grill. It wasn't until she was in her car that she let herself feel the panic. Her hand shook on the steering wheel. How was she going to handle rent? What about helping Evan? And who was going to hire her in this economy without so much as a reference from Tom? She fought back tears. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She almost ignored it, but something made her glance at the screen. The caller ID read unknown. Heart pounding, she picked up. "Hello," she managed, her voice unsteady. A deep, calm voice answered. "Megan? This is Richard Lawson." There was a pause. "The man you served last night at Lancaster Grill." Megan's breath caught. "Oh, yes, sir. How did you get my number?" She wasn't sure what to say. Was he calling to apologize for the trouble? Or did he somehow think she could still serve him? Richard cleared his throat. "You might say I have my ways. I wanted to reach out because I heard what happened this morning." She tightened her grip on the phone. "News travels fast." "Yes, it does," Richard said, his tone serious. "I'm calling because I want you to know something. I wasn't just any random customer last night. I own Lancaster Grill." Megan thought she'd misheard. "You own the diner?" "That and several other restaurants," Richard confirmed. "I visit them unannounced to see how customers are treated. Let's just say I didn't like what I observed." Megan's thoughts spun. If you're the owner, why didn't you do something then and there? Richard exhaled. Sometimes I watch and wait. I wanted to confirm my suspicions about how management and certain staff were behaving. I let them fire you to see their true colors. The shock left her speechless. So, you knew Tom would do this? I suspected, Richard admitted. And it's exactly why I'm calling. Megan, I'd like you to come back. She almost dropped the phone in surprise. Come back, she repeated, half laughing in disbelief. I just got fired. Yes, Richard said, calm and unwavering. But not as a waitress. I want you as the new manager. Megan barely slept that night, torn between astonishment and disbelief. It was one thing to be fired out of the blue. It was another to be offered the position of the very person who had dismissed her. Richard Lawson had explained his reasoning. He needed an honest, fair-minded person to run Lancaster Grill. He'd seen enough in his brief visit to realize Megan cared about every customer, regardless of social, standing, or clothing. That was the culture he wanted in his restaurants. Nevertheless, Megan feared it was all too good to be true. She spent half the night second-guessing the phone call. Was it a prank? An elaborate trick? But every time doubt crept in, she remembered Richard's firm, yet empathetic tone. He sounded genuine and, more importantly, determined. So by morning, she'd summoned the courage to return, her new manager's title echoing in her head like a drumbeat. She arrived just after opening, stepping inside the familiar diner with a jolt of déjà vu. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee reminded her of all the shifts she'd worked. But this time felt different. She had a new sense of purpose and a mix of nerves churning in her stomach. The moment she walked in, heads turned. Customers didn't notice much beyond a passing glance, but Beth and Jason froze as if they'd seen a ghost. Beth's eyes flicked to Megan's clothes, as though checking if she still wore the old uniform. Jason mumbled something under his breath, and the two exchanged a look of confusion. Megan placed her bag on a nearby stool, steeling herself for the confrontation she knew was coming. Sure enough, Tom emerged from the back, flipping through papers with his usual scowl. He caught sight of Megan and stopped in his tracks. "You," he began, voice low, "I already fired you. What are you doing here?" Megan opened her mouth, but before she could reply, another voice sounded behind her. "I believe I can explain that." Richard Lawson stepped inside, hands in the pockets of his well-tailored coat, scanning the diner with calm authority. The change in Beth and Jason was immediate. Their postures stiffened, and Tom's face blanched. He seemed to recognize Richard, perhaps from a corporate photo or a past visit. Before Tom could form a coherent protest, Richard addressed the entire staff. "I visited Lancaster Grill last night," he said in a clear voice, "and I saw enough to conclude that this place needs immediate changes." Murmurs spread among the waitstaff and kitchen crew who peeked through the service window. Beth's confusion was evident. Jason, arms folded, looked ready for a fight. Tom tried to stammer something about protocol, but Richard silenced him with a pointed glance. "I'm terminating Tom's position as manager," Richard announced, effective immediately. "The reasons are clear: bias in customer service, poor leadership, and a culture of disrespect towards certain patrons. None of that aligns with my vision for this company." Beth let out a tiny gasp, and Jason's mouth gaped open. Tom's expression turned furious. "You can't just," he started, but Richard shook his head. "I can and I am," Richard replied. "If you have questions, feel free to contact the corporate office. But be advised, the decision is final." Turning his attention back to the staff, he continued, "Megan here showed me what real service looks like. Genuine kindness should be the standard, not an exception. She's your new manager." Megan's heart pounded as all eyes fell on her. Beth's expression turned icy, and Jason muttered something that sounded like unbelievable. A few of the younger servers, those who'd seen Megan quietly do her job day after day, looked cautiously optimistic. The older line cook, Manny, actually nodded in approval. Clearing her throat, Megan tried to project confidence. "I know this is a shock," she said, "but we're not here to tear the place apart. We just need to make it what it should have been all along, a fair, welcoming environment for everyone." Richard looked satisfied. "I'll be checking in regularly," he said, "but for now, Megan's in charge. Anyone who can't respect that is free to leave." A heavy silence followed. No one moved. Beth shot Megan a venomous glare, but didn't budge. Jason clenched his jaw, arms still crossed, looking miserable. Tom threw down the papers he'd been holding and marched back to his office, presumably to clear out his things. As he passed Megan, he muttered, "You'll regret this," under his breath. She swallowed, but refused to look away. With Tom gone, a distinct hush fell over the diner. The customers were mostly unaware of the drama unfolding, but the staff felt the ripple effect immediately. Megan forced a small smile. "Let's get back to work," she said, lifting her chin. "We still have a breakfast rush to handle." Beth turned on her heel and stalked away, presumably to fill coffee cups with an attitude. Jason resumed wiping tables, though his scowl didn't fade. Megan took a steadying breath. Stepping behind the counter she used to stand behind as a server. Only now, she had a different role. Richard watched her calmly. "You'll be fine," he said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'll be in touch." Then he exited, leaving Megan with the curious, uneasy gazes of her coworkers. Part of her wanted to run after him, to plead for more guidance. But she knew he had left intentionally, so she could establish her own leadership from the start. Her mind whirled with the enormity of the task ahead. She needed to learn how to manage inventory, schedule shifts, handle payroll, address staff conflicts, and maintain a professional environment. But the biggest challenge? Shifting the diner's toxic culture. For Megan, it was worth every ounce of effort. She had to prove it could be done. Over the next few weeks, Megan's life became a whirlwind of new responsibilities. It was one thing to wait tables and keep your head down. It was another to oversee schedules, balance budgets, and ensure every customer was treated with respect. She spent her first days as manager tackling the basics, reorganizing the stockroom, updating the employee schedule to better distribute shifts, and quietly observing who actually put effort into their work. Beth made no secret of her displeasure. She responded to Megan's instructions with curt nods or sarcastic remarks. Jason was only marginally better, performing his duties with an obvious chip on his shoulder. A handful of other servers, like a timid college student named Noah, were wary at first, uncertain how to act under the new management. But once they realized Megan valued input from everyone, they began suggesting small improvements. The real changes came in how customers were greeted. Megan insisted that every patron, whether dressed in paint-stained overalls or a tailored business suit, be welcomed with the same warmth. She spent hours on the floor, guiding staff on how to make small talk without prying and encouraging them to see each person as more than just a tip. A few of the older employees resisted, grumbling that Megan's approach was too idealistic. But she refused to back down. One evening, an older couple came in wearing worn jackets, looking shy and a bit anxious. Megan watched as Jason walked right past them without offering a table. She intervened, politely guiding them to a cozy booth. When she glanced up, Jason avoided her gaze. Later, she pulled him aside and said, "We greet every customer." "Got it." He shrugged, mumbled something about they looked like they wouldn't tip, and tried to walk away. Megan blocked his path. "That's not your call," she said firmly. "Treat them with respect, or there's the door." Jason glared, but said nothing more. Word started to spread in the neighborhood. Lancaster Grill was under new management, someone who actually cared about quality service. Slowly, regulars who had felt overlooked began returning. People who once received half-hearted treatment now came in smiling, feeling valued. The tips improved, and the atmosphere lightened. Even the line cooks, who used to remain silent at their stations, began sharing recipes and playful banter with Megan. It wasn't a perfect transformation. Beth still rolled her eyes at times, and Jason sulked more often than not, but it was progress. Megan also made sure Tom's old office was more welcoming. She cleared out stacks of neglected paperwork, pinned up a calendar with staff birthdays and important dates, and kept the door open so that employees could drop by if they had issues to discuss. She started checking in with each worker at least once a week, How's the schedule working for you? Anything we can improve? Some stared back in confusion, unaccustomed to being asked for feedback. Others hesitantly offered suggestions. Each piece of input helped Megan refine the diner's operations, from rearranging how dishes were stacked to scheduling breaks more efficiently. A month after Megan took charge, Richard Lawson walked in without warning, just as he had before. This time, the tension among the staff was less about ignoring him and more about wanting to show they were meeting Megan's standards. Beth, though not overly friendly, did greet him. Jason managed a stiff smile. It wasn't a perfect demonstration of warmth, but it was leagues beyond the icy treatment he had once given. Richard ordered coffee and a slice of pie, chatting with Megan at the counter between sips. He took in the diner's vibe, the more cooperative staff, the friendlier ambience, and nodded approvingly. When he asked how she was adjusting, Megan admitted it hadn't been easy. "Some days, I wonder if I'm in over my head," she confessed. "But then I see small signs of progress, and it keeps me going." He smiled. "That's how you lead," he said, step by step, showing them it's possible to do better. She offered a grateful nod. Before leaving, he met her eyes and said, "I made the right decision." Those words of affirmation boosted Megan's confidence for days. One of the last obstacles was winning over the employees who were on the fence about the new standards. A few parted ways amicably, admitting they preferred the old style of working. Megan didn't beg them to stay. She needed a team that believed in the vision. Gradually, the diner hired new faces, folks who shared Megan's commitment to customer service. And day by day, Lancaster Grill grew into the kind of place where everyone felt welcome. Megan saw how far they had come when, one afternoon, she noticed Beth quietly refilling a cup for a customer who looked down on his luck. No sighs, no grudging looks, just a polite nod, as if she'd finally decided to try. Megan caught Beth's eye and offered a small, genuine smile. Beth huffed and looked away, but the moment felt like a milestone. People could change, even if slowly. That night, locking up after closing, Megan reflected on how the diner's fortunes and her own life had shifted. She'd lost a job for doing the right thing, and in a twist of fate, gained an opportunity to reshape the place entirely. She wouldn't trade this journey for anything. Turning off the lights, she smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new rewards. Megan's story is a testament to the power of integrity. By choosing to do the right thing, something as simple as welcoming every customer with genuine warmth, she risked her livelihood in a place where profits and prejudice sometimes took precedence over decency. Yet that very act of compassion set in motion events that changed not just her own life, but the culture of Lancaster Grill. Although she faced betrayal by coworkers and an unfair dismissal, Megan's unwavering principles caught the attention of the undercover owner, Richard Lawson. He recognized her kindness for what it was, the heart of true customer service. Instead of moving on quietly, Megan became the force that turned a once toxic environment into a place where everyone was valued. Along the way, she discovered her own leadership potential, navigated hostility from those who resisted change, and slowly reshaped the diner's reputation. In the end, it was never about just holding a higher position. For Megan, leading Lancaster Grill meant restoring a sense of dignity and fairness to people who had been overlooked, both staff and customers alike. Her journey reminds us that doing the right thing can be costly in the short term, but the long-term rewards often exceed anything we could have imagined. Through perseverance, courage, and a genuine concern for others, Megan transformed a small diner on the east side of Columbus into a welcoming haven. It's a powerful reminder that integrity might demand sacrifices, but it's also the key to earning the kind of respect and opportunities that truly matter.